Welcome to No2Nato, No to War, coming to you from storm-tossed Great Britain. But we are tri-continental again this evening, with speakers from the United States and from Australia. Well, the storm is a natural one at the moment, but we haven't quite ruled out the possibility of the biggest storm of all. Notwithstanding the change of custodian of the keys to the nuclear armory. It's true that Joe Biden took us closer to World War III than any previous American president. And the fact that he was a Democrat, which is supposedly the party of the people, supposedly the party of peace, is, I'm afraid, par for the course. Most of the criminal atrocities of my lifetime have been committed by Democratic Party presidents. On the face of it, the Republicans are the party of war, the party of Wall Street and the military-industrial complex, and traditionally the party of the three-letter agencies. It was always a truism in American politics that it was the liberals and the so-called progressives who were most skeptical about the approach and the business of spying and policing in the United States of America. But like so much else, cross-dressing is the order of the day. Nowadays, on the weekend, for example, thousands of the Pussy Hat Brigade were out protesting against President Donald Trump before he'd even started. Tens of thousands of people who had been singularly silent for the most part and not on the streets as Joe Biden laid waste to the world and took us, as I say, to the brink of nuclear holocaust. Well, so far, so good-ish in the Donald Trump administration. The first things he did were the calls to President Xi Jinping of China and President Vladimir Putin of Russia. The second thing that he did was to underscore his responsibility for the ceasefire in Gaza. He's put his name on it. So if it breaks down, it's his name that will now be tarnished. And of course, he has tasked the man who negotiated the ceasefire in Lebanon, about whom more later and about which more later, with the task of seeking nuclear agreement with Iran. These are all positive straws in the wind. There are plenty of negatives to which I shall turn in a minute. But I've made no secret. I spoke with some of my friends outside the American embassy on Inauguration Day to say bye-bye Biden, good riddance to bad rubbish, for one principal reason only. I believed that Donald Trump would stop World War III. And if you don't stop World War III, none of the other issues that concern us are of any moment whatsoever, because there will be no Palestine question. There will be no question of any kind if the world goes up in nuclear smoke. And I believed, and I still, for the moment, believe that Trump is more likely to reach agreement with President Putin to bring about an end to the Ukraine war. Although he seems to be being advised by some of the same fools who were advising Biden and Blinken, because there he was, blustering braggadocio at the Oval Office desk just the other day, threatening Russia with what will happen if they don't make a deal over Ukraine. It's all bluster. It's all words. He must know that Russia cares not a fig about further sanctions. In fact, the amount of trade between the United States and Russia is so infinitesimal that any new American sanctions wouldn't even be noticed. And Russia is already the most sanctioned country in the entire world, and its economy is booming. So I put that down to bluster for domestic consumption. The really important thing is that negotiations are underway about a meeting between Trump and Putin, probably in Geneva, one of the most important, momentous meetings of modern times, if and when it happens. But if they don't hurry up, there won't be anything left of Ukraine to negotiate about, because the advances on the battlefield by the Russian armed forces are accelerating almost daily. In fact, every hour or two, a new success is chalked up. Villages, hamlets, and sometimes big towns, soon big cities like Kharkov, like Odessa, will be taken by the advancing Russians, liberated according to the Russian people who live there and have lived under the Zelensky dictatorship in some fear and trepidation, if not worse, over these last few years. So they better hurry up and get the negotiations on if they want any meaningful Ukraine to continue to exist at the end of those negotiations. So on the China front, again, Trump has been far better than some might have expected. He had a phone call with Xi Jinping, in fact, the first of the world leaders that he spoke to. That makes a change. It would normally have been Netanyahu. And the discussion seemed to be productive. And Trump's noises about China are so far, very far from the Republican Party's traditional riffs about China being their number one enemy. The call with Xi Jinping was a long one. Took, I think, 50 minutes. And that, by recent standards, counts as a serious conversation. The Middle East remains the place most likely to send the world up in smoke. For the first time in almost 16 months, women and children are not being cut to ribbons by Netanyahu's Air Force, Navy, and Army, using almost always American weaponry and shells paid for by the American taxpayer. This is something to celebrate. The task of uncovering the thousands of bodies that are still underneath the rubble is, of course, proceeding apace. But the aid trucks are coming in. The water is beginning to flow. The electricity also. The immediate emergency in Gaza is over. But it isn't over in the West Bank. Indeed, to a considerable degree, Netanyahu has simply transferred the enormous aggression visited on the people of Gaza onto the West Bank, and to the dismay of many, the surprise of none, at least in this camp, the forces of the so-called PA, so-called Palestinian so-called authority, acting as the gendarmerie of the Israeli occupation force, have joined in and have been murdering Palestinian militants and leaders of the resistance in camps like the camp in Jenin, which I personally know so well. If the flames grow wider and bigger in the West Bank, then there is every possibility that the allies of the Palestinian people in what remains of the axis of resistance will begin again their intervention in the war. When they said they would not tolerate the genocide of the Palestinian people, they didn't just mean in Gaza. They meant the Palestinian people as a whole. And if genocide begins to be the order of the day in the West Bank, then those allies will begin their barrage of rockets and missiles raining down on Tel Aviv again, and we will be back into the possibility of an all-out regional war. And bear in mind, Iran is now a strategic ally of the Russian Federation. Very important documents were signed in Moscow just the other day to that effect. And then there's the Lebanon. The ceasefire, so-called, negotiated by the man who's now negotiating the Iranian nuclear track for Donald Trump, has been honored more in the breach, of course. More than 1,000 breaches of the ceasefire terms have been committed by Israel, but none have been committed by the Lebanese resistance. But they haven't gone away, you know, and they are ready at the end of the 60 days to begin again their struggle against the Israeli invaders. And whilst their attacks on Israel have stopped and will not resume as part of the ceasefire deal with Gaza, again, if the situation in the West Bank is as a matter of deliberate policy, it's not. I mean, they talk about settler violence, but these European settlers on the hilltops in the West Bank are acting with the clear approval and authority of the Israeli state, of the government of Benjamin Netanyahu, and by extension, therefore, all the governments, like the British and American, which stand behind them. So the possibility of an intifada throughout Palestine, throughout the Palestinian areas trapped inside the state of Israel, and involving countries like Yemen, like Iraq, like Lebanon, is a real and present danger. So we're not out of the woods yet. In summary, I would say, we are much, much less likely now to have World War III erupt in Eastern Europe, in the Ukraine, as a result of the NATO offensive against Russia. But that doesn't mean that the threats to international peace as a result of NATO's belligerent, aggressive policies of arming and funding and seeking every possible opportunity to weaken and divide America's enemies has gone away. It clearly has not. Now, we have assembled tonight a panel of speakers from 3 continents, as I say. And the first of those is a Texan Rose, the one and only Rachel Blevins, independent journalist and broadcaster, and always a welcome guest. Rachel, it's changeover time, handover time. The Republicans are back, holding power in all 3 houses. Does that fill you with optimism about the international front, at least, or are you still nervous?
You know, I think I'll always be a little bit nervous and maybe a little bit pessimistic, just a little bit. But exactly as you were saying there, you know, at least it's not Joe Biden. We can all kind of breathe a sigh of relief. We're not running to World War III just yet. But when I see some of the statements that Trump has made this week, specifically on Russia, that's when I start to get a little bit concerned, because for months now, we've heard him promise, right? He campaigned so heavily on this promise that he would end the war in Ukraine if we just elected him to become president again. Well, the people did that. Many Americans want to see an end to the war in Ukraine. And in his first few days, he comes in and he's talking about saying that, oh, Putin is destroying Russia, right? He's claiming that the Russian economy is in shambles, that 1 million Russians have died in this war. And I'm sitting there watching this going, where is he getting his data, right? who is feeding him information, because none of this is remotely correct. If anything, if we want to talk about destruction, he needs to look at Ukraine and everything that the US has put them through under the Biden administration. And when it comes to what he's saying about the war, he keeps saying we should never have gotten into it in the first place, right? If I were president, this would not have happened. Well, that's all fine and good to say that, but he needs to fast forward up to 2025, where we stand right now, and realize that not only is this war ongoing, but Russia is actively winning this war. And there is nothing, no amount of weapons that the US is currently able to send Kiev to change the tide of the war, to change the situation on the battlefield, to address these current manpower shortages, unless NATO wants to start sending manpower of their own, which I don't think that they really do. Trump needs to come to where we are right now. And one of my biggest concerns watching the cabinet that he assembled is that he has people like his national security advisor, Mike Waltz, who has been saying for months now that the US needs to put more pressure on Russia, that there have to be more sanctions, that the US, at the time he was claiming they needed to remove restrictions on Ukraine, they say, really Washington's use of long-range weapons on Russian territory. And so we've heard months of his advisors saying that, and then you get Trump into office, and now he's talking about possibly putting more sanctions on Russia. He's telling Putin that it's only going to get worse. And I'm looking at those statements and going, okay, Trump is in for a massive wake-up call when he does speak with Russian President Putin. And I hope that he does. I hope that everything that they're saying about plans for talks come together, because I think he's going to be in for quite a wake-up call when they start talking. And he possibly realizes that he has been given a lot of bad information. Either that, maybe Trump's just playing us all right now, and maybe he sees this differently. But from everything he's saying, he is showing that he does not understand the situation on the ground in Ukraine. And given just how involved the US is in that war, I think it's something that both himself and his team need to start understanding sooner rather than later.
He is, of course, the author of The Art of the Deal, and nobody walks into a negotiation with their arms wide open and their hands out in front of them. I myself have, in previous lifetimes, been a negotiator. And the key thing in a negotiation is to listen for the key points amidst all the bluster. And some of those have been good news for me. For example, the US administration has said that European troops entering the conflict is a non-starter. Now, this was an important signal to the idiot savants like Macron and Starmer, who continue to at least talk about that possibility, about there being NATO after the United States of America. Now, those of us who know the actual military state of play know that that really is a non-starter, but the Americans saying it is a signal to the hawkish European satrapies of the United States to get back into their box, that this will be settled between Trump and Putin. That was an encouragement to me. But you're right, a lot of the rhetoric would appear either to have been the result of bad information. I mean, I've been in Russia very recently. The idea that Russia is being destroyed could not be farther from the truth. The Russian economy is doing just fine, thank you very much, and will continue to, however many sanctions from the Western countries are placed upon it. This may just be for domestic consumption, so that he goes into the talks seeming like a harder nut to crack than he might turn out to be. What say you?
I think that's definitely possible. It is interesting to me that Trump campaigns so hard on ending this war, right? And now he's kind of putting out these statements about really turning up the heat on Russia. And to be fair, this is not Trump's war. He came in with a very bad deal, right? No one wants to negotiate from the end that the US currently is right now. Everyone would want to be in Russia's position, being able to walk into these talks and go, okay, we don't have to make a deal, right? Ukraine, arguably, they should know that they have to make a deal, but under the Biden administration, they constantly approach the situation as if Russia was on the losing end. And Zelensky got to go around and spout his victory plan or his peace plan, neither of which had anything to do with victory or peace, and act as though that was the roadmap to ending the war in Ukraine when we all knew that it wasn't. So I'm very curious to see how this plays out and if Trump gets to a point where he says, okay, this is not our war, right? We kind of saw that with him initially with some of his statements. They were asking him about the ceasefire in Gaza when it was his first day in the White House. And he was kind of saying, oh, that's not our war to deal with. That's what he needs to be. That needs to be his approach to Ukraine. Now, the problem is the US is so involved. They are completely involved in propping up Kiev's government and military. So if the US does pull out, then Kiev falls and Europe, they would not handle it well, talking about Macron and some of those other politicians in Europe that would be struggling through it. So I'm very curious to see how that plays out. I know that Trump has a lot of pressure on him. I mean, even though we are in this post-Russia Gate era, even though he called it out very plainly in that social media post that he had where he said, hey, we've had this Russiagate hoax that I've had to live through, that I've had to deal with. I think he still feels like he has that pressure on him. He still feels like he has to, quote unquote, stand up to Russia in some way. Now, as you pointed out earlier, there's always the possibility too that, something else happens in the world and we're focused on another conflict and Ukraine kind of in a way fades away. Right now, it's front and center to a certain extent because you have Israel in this position where right now we have a ceasefire in Gaza. Israel's going, hey, don't focus on what we're doing in the West Bank and how we're targeting Palestinians there. Look elsewhere. And now we're kind of focused in on Ukraine. But if there are increasing tensions with China or more particularly with Iran seems like the more likely player at the moment, then I could see the focus kind of shifting there more off of Ukraine. But given right now, the focus being here right now, it's still amazing to me how many people in the West, how many members of the public know nothing about what's going on the battlefield. And they still think that Ukraine is winning. They think that Russia is being destroyed or that Russia has lost 1 million people in this war. And so it is a little bit frightening to see that even with the current information war that we're dealing with, that people still haven't quite woken up to the reality. And Trump seems to, at least for now, be one of those people.
Well, most people, of course, get all of their information about what's happening in their country, in the world, from the gigantic lie machine, the Goebbelian, Orwellian lie machine that is the so-called legacy media. Those of us who know better are a minority, no longer a tiny minority, but a minority. And our audience is, of course, growing and growing. And we just have to work harder to let the truth be known. But the leaders must know the truth. Trump must know the truth. And Zelensky looked to me at Davos, which itself has been a bit of a damp squib this year. Even the hookers have gone home early because of the lack of business. Forgive me. I know you're a prim Texas rose, but the prostitution business has taken quite a dent in Davos because the numbers just aren't there. The sense of optimism just isn't there. And Zelensky, he looked pretty hang-dog to me.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Looking at Zelensky, I think he's struggling a bit right here, right? His rhetoric has changed. He started talking about, okay, yeah, maybe we're ready for a deal after realizing, I think he's kind of coming off of the high of the Biden administration where they were always behind him. He had all of this support. He had US officials flying into Kiev every few weeks to, well, not flying in, but coming in to visit, we shall say, coming in to meet with him. And now he's having to deal with the sober reality of the Trump administration, which is that Trump is not going to hold his hand, right? Trump is not going to tiptoe around him and treat him like he is this little celebrity that needs to be put up on a pedestal. No, Trump is looking at Ukraine and going, hey, you guys need us. You guys would fall apart if it was not for US support. I do think that Trump at least understands that much. But when it comes to Zelensky and some of the recent statements that he's making about, oh, we need 200,000 peacekeepers, right? And he's trying to really pull NATO in. I think that that is going to end up backfiring on him, because while he may have heard from some European politicians who were all gung-ho for that plan, as you were pointing out, Trump's not on board with that. His administration is not on board with that. They know how bad it would be for them if they had any kind of American boots on the ground, or even really European boots on the ground, at least officially. And that's something that they're recognizing. And I would hope that Zelensky would start to realize that he is easily replaceable, right? The US just needs a puppet in Kiev who works with them. They don't necessarily need Zelensky. There's nothing special about Zelensky other than the fact that he's just crazy enough to stay in that role to do what the West wants. But there are a lot of other people like him who would be willing to do at least a version of that. So I think what we're seeing with Zelensky is him kind of realizing that, oh, this happy ride that has been his time with the Biden administration is coming to an abrupt end, and he may find himself at least somewhere near a room with Vladimir Putin. Although if you listen to what Russia is saying, they're pointing out the fact they're not worried about, trying to negotiate with Zelensky, because they know that he's not the one in charge. They know that they need to deal with Washington, because it's the US that ultimately is the one that is in charge and that is prolonging this war with their ongoing support for Kiev.
Well, Zelensky didn't even get an invite to the inauguration, and even Liz Truss got one of those. I think that tells him where he is below the salt. Rachel Blevins, thank you very much for joining us again on No to NATO, No to War. Now, that was the Americas. Now, storm-tossed Great Britain. My good friend Crispin Flintoff was present at the US Embassy on Monday, where a good time was had by all. And you're lucky he's here and ready to speak on the first platform, I think, Crispin, of No to NATO, No to War, at least on the broadcast. You're most welcome. I wanted to ask you, you were for a long time an important member of the now ruling Labour Party, no longer, of course, no self-respecting person could be. But Starmer, your erstwhile leader and Britain's leader, hasn't yet given up the ghost, has he? He's still talking as if even if Trump pulls out of the Ukraine war, the Europeans will have to fill the breach.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, he said he'll be with them for is it 100 years or maybe 1,000 years? I don't know. It could be more than 1,000. He's really on for long, big numbers, Starmer, and he's committed to giving.
He signed a 100-year treaty between Britain and the Ukraine, even though he'll be and the youngest member of the British Parliament will be 70 years dead by the time that treaty comes to an end. This is vainglory in its extreme, is it not?
Yeah, I'm incredulous about what Starmer's up to. I mean, the fact that he's committing so much money to that as well every year. He says billions a year to Ukraine. And at the same time as that, he's refusing to update hospitals that are crumbling. There's a 200-year-old hospital in Paddington that's falling apart. Some of it's going into the local rails line. It's actually collapsing, and people are being told to get out of the hospital. They have to wait 15 years for a repair on that. He's announced that the same day as Trump was inaugurated, obviously to hide it as a story. And he does these kind of vain things about foreign policy, but they're all on the back of those people in the US who are clearly have some agenda to support Zelensky, whatever. He's just being led all the way. I mean, he could be sort of had dementia like Biden, or he could just be Starmer, where he pretends that he's his own man. They're one and the same, Starmer or Biden. I mean, dementia or not.
Well, I'm sometimes criticized for making this point, but I stand by it, that famously Mussolini went around the world threatening people with Germany's army. And that's really what Starmer is doing. He's going around the world threatening people with America's army, but America now has a new commander-in-chief that isn't going to commit his army. And yet Starmer is still talking as if he was an independent player. It reminds me, I was only 2 years old at the time, of what happened in 1956 in Suez, when, without American approval, Britain and France, in secret conspiracy with Israel, invaded Egypt and tried to seize the Suez Canal. And the United States president at that time, Eisenhower, slammed them back into their box and thought he'd locked it shut. But we now have a generation of European leaders that don't appear to realize that they are just vassals. They cannot make decisions that the man in the big house, whose vassal they are, doesn't agree with.
Well, and they're trying to do all this stuff before Trump gets in to look at the papers and work out what's going on. And I mean, it's ridiculous. As if Trump's just going to accept this kind of 100-year commitment from the UK and not bother to question it. And Starmer's also been writing kind of cringing eulogies to Trump now, just as David Lammy has. And they've all been found to have said the opposite not long ago about Trump. And Trump doesn't seem to me someone who believes people who are like that. He won't work with someone like that. I mean, he's just not. They're the worst kind of people to work with. So you can't be duplicitous with Trump. He's a businessman. He can see right through it. I mean, he's not going to deal with Starmer, is he?
Well, he hasn't so far, and the word is that he's going to reject Starmer's nominee as ambassador to Washington, one Lord Peter Mandelson, twice sacked by Tony Blair for corruption. And you had to be pretty bad to be sacked for corruption by Tony Blair. And of course, a close associate, a bosom buddy of the disgraced child sex trafficker, Jeffrey Epstein. What was Starmer thinking about putting him forward as the UK's ambassador there?
Well, I've always thought that Mandelson was leading Starmer like a puppet master. I actually was at the Labour conference in the last time I was there before they chucked me out. And during Starmer's speech, I shouted, "Where's Peter Mandelson?" as loud as I could. And it was heard. And Starmer couldn't actually read his notes anymore. He was so thrown by the words Peter Mandelson. The fact that he's come out with this, like there's lots of other people he could have selected as an ambassador. I don't understand. He must have something on him. I mean, there must be some dirt that Mandelson's got on Starmer, or Mandelson's paying Starmer? I don't understand it. I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, it's definitely an unforced error, as we say in football. There was no reason to do it. The British have a diplomatic corps, centuries of experience within it. They're very good at it. I've known many British ambassadors, two of whom are comrades of ours, Peter Ford, and Peter was the ambassador in Syria. He's now one of the leaders of No2Nato, and I was asking him this very question: why didn't they choose from amongst the diplomatic corps of people whose job it is to go abroad to lie for their country, as an ambassador's role truly is? And Peter is as lost for an answer as you and me are. But it's going to be a huge black eye for Britain and for Starmer if his nominee is rejected by Donald Trump as not being a fit and proper person to be an ambassador in Washington. Go figure.
Well, I can't see how Donald Trump saying someone's not got the pedigree to Starmer. I don't know how Starmer will respond to that. But the problem we've got really is, as you were saying earlier, the media, the legacy media are just giving Starmer an easy ride all the time. I have not been able to get over the genocide, the way that they're reporting the genocide, and Starmer's every kind of weasel words about trying to support people in Palestine, get the aid in. It's such nonsense. And the whole of the country is calling out for the end of Starmer, whether it's the people from Tommy Robinson Brigade or people who are looking for peace in Palestine. He's been the most disastrous prime minister, and the media are still kind of letting him get away with it. He's had 6 months. He's seen no growth in the economy. He's seen more trouble in the world going on. I just find this is a problem we've got. That's why we need you, George, to be putting out your broadcasts, and I'm trying to show the other side as well. And we all need to share this stuff because it's ridiculous. I mean, how this man is in power at all without any scrutiny, it's beyond belief.
It is, and we've known Labour leaders in the past and disagreed with them politically, but we've never seen a Labour Prime Minister so inept and so hated. I mean, you say the legacy media are protecting him, and they are, but that hasn't helped him. In the latest opinion poll, the government are in third place. Nigel Farage's Reform Party is at 25. The Conservatives are at 25. So between the two of them, they could sweep the boards at the next general election. And if they were to unify in a general election contest, I mean, it could actually be a wipeout for Keir Starmer's Labour Party. Just remind the viewers, Crispin, when does the Crispin Flintoff show air, and how can they find it?
Well, I'm on Zoom every Sunday morning at 10:30 until 12:30 every Sunday, and it's also, we have clips on YouTube. If you go to the Crispin Flintoff show, there you can see .co.uk. You can subscribe there. The main thing with the show is we have people from all over the country who are activists who've been attacked for their opinions, especially on Palestine, and we give them a voice. And it makes us feel like we're not alone. I mean, that's the thing for me, is I feel often isolated in my opinions because I don't see it on the media, but also you just don't read about it. But when you go on to a show on Zoom and you see 500 plus people all agreeing that the world needs to change and we need to set up a new order, that's going to be more that's going to call for peace. I mean, the NATO system is doing us no good. We've got the threat of war in the Middle East. We've got the threat of war in Eastern Europe. We've got terrible austerity in this country. Hospitals crumbling. We're having pensioners might have all their pensions, their bank statements all gone through. See if they're hoarding cash. That's where we're going to. This is just a really, really dark time, and we need each other. And it's good that we've got shows like yours, George, and this, and anything we can to just keep our spirits up.
Thank you, Crispin Flintoff, for your No2Nato, No2War televised debut. Now let's go down under, given the weather outside. Why wouldn't we? It is the Aussie Cossack who joins us now from Australia, where it is early morning. So good morning to you, Simeon, and thanks for joining us at this early hour. So Trump is in the White House. What do you think of the show so far?
Good morning, George. Pleasure to speak with you. Look, it's all happening. Moments ago, in fact, Vladimir Putin's motorcade was spotted urgently heading to the Kremlin. Now, it's only just after midnight in Moscow. It's unusual for the president's motorcade to suddenly head to the Kremlin. People are speculating that perhaps President Trump is on line one as we speak. We can only speculate, but we know definitely for sure that in the last 24 hours, President Trump has said several times that he welcomes a conversation with Putin. And I think these two men are in a position to sort out the world's problems, to sort out the situation in Ukraine very quickly. We know that Trump promised as part of his pre-election campaign or his election campaign to wrap it up in 24 hours. That hasn't happened. But the most important actions were made in the first 24 hours. And that was, of course, Trump banning any further US military aid to Ukraine. 90-day moratorium. Now, this is where it gets interesting, George. 90 days, Trump has said he's not going to give any more weapons, any more money. Vladimir Putin has previously said, stop funding and stop supplying weapons to Zelensky, and the war will be over in 60 days. So you could say that Trump has given an extra 30 days on top as a businessman. He's saying, right, Putin needs 60 days. I'll give him 90. After 90 days, let's see what happens. I think that without the US military aid, without the weapons, without the Patriot missiles, the HIMARS missiles, the ATACMS missiles, the satellite intelligence, the US instructors, don't forget all these missiles have to be launched with the participation of NATO US military instructors. If Trump is serious about this and he's turning off the switch to Ukraine, maybe he's giving Putin a free hand. Grab as much territory as you can, and then in 90 days' time, let's shake hands and let's stop this. That is a plausible theory as to what is going on at the moment. What do you think, George? I think whatever happens.
Well, it's so plausible, Simeon. It happens to be my own belief, my own theory. I think that Trump is basically setting out a spheres of influence policy. He's recognizing that Russia, as a superpower, has legitimate rights to make sure that in their spheres of influence, they are not threatened by the other side. And he's asserting where his sphere of influence extends. It extends to taking Greenland off the cuckold government of Denmark. It extends to reasserting American control of the Panama Canal. As a matter of fact, no one's ever taken control away from them. He constructs this chimera of China. All China's doing is operating a port, and to all accounts, very well and very efficiently and very profitably. But China doesn't control the Panama Canal and doesn't want to. I think that Trump is saying You can have your spheres of influence, and we'll have ours. And we will use our personal chemistry and relationship to make sure that nothing gets out of hand. Well, for an old timer like me, Simeon, it's like a return to the old days. And I preferred the old days. What about you?
Well, definitely the days of Stalin, Churchill, and the American president meeting and carving up the world and saying, right, this is ours, this is yours. You have influence here, you have influence there. Of course, Vladimir Putin is not going to oppose US influence in the Gulf of Mexico or the newly named Gulf of America or the Panama Canal. Or if the US wants to take Mexico on and fight the cartels and start a little border and a little war on the southern border, Vladimir Putin is not going to interfere. He's not going to supply Mexico with weapons and missiles, just like Biden was doing to Ukraine, for example. If Trump wants to annex Canada and turn Canada into a United States protectorate, Putin's not going to say no. If Trump wants to take Greenland, Denmark can't stop him, and sucked into Denmark because Denmark gave all their artillery and all their tanks and all their weapons to Zelensky. So in a strange twist of fate, karma comes back to bite Denmark in the backside, and it serves them right. If they have no more weapons, no more military, they should have held on to their gear and not given it to Zelensky. So there's no sympathy from Russia and from Vladimir Putin if Trump wants to take on Greenland and annex the territory of Greenland. Of course, Greenland gives Trump and the Americans a very strong foothold in the Arctic, where the Russians dominate the situation with the largest atomic icebreaker fleet. But it's only fair. And the most important thing in what we're seeing now is the mainstream media in the West is reacting to Trump's words, saying Trump has given Putin an ultimatum and threatened Putin with tariffs. I mean, we're far beyond the point of tariffs. We're far beyond the point of taxes or tariffs. When Trump in 2025 January supposedly threatens Vladimir Putin with tariffs, it's not a threat at all. It's basically saying, I have to appear tough, I have to look balanced, so I'm going to say this to you, Putin, publicly, so the media can grab their headlines. So the media and the BBC and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post can say, Trump is talking tough. He's issued Putin with demands. Stop the war or we are going to increase taxes on Russian goods. What Russian goods? We're in our third year of sanctions. The trade between the United States and Russia is almost non-existent. And at this point, it's lip service, but Trump's got to do it. I understand why he's got to still play the game. But deep down inside, Trump knows, Putin knows, you and I, George, we both know, everybody watching this show tonight knows, or this morning in Australia, that Trump has already buried Zelensky. Trump has already said Zelensky's over, it's finished. Zelensky not invited to the inauguration of Trump. Zelensky knows that his regime is in its dying days. And the greatest thing is in all of this, as soon as there is a deal reached, as soon as there is some type of a peace deal or ceasefire deal, cessation of territory to Russia, clearly that's the only way this is going to work. Russia, whatever Russia has got, whatever Russia has physically managed to liberate in terms of the Kherson region, the Zaporozhye region, the Donetsk People's Republic, Lugansk People's Republic, that belongs to Russia. But the greatest thing is that as soon as the ceasefire is agreed and as soon as there's a peace deal and a settlement, as they have referred to this, as Trump has referred to it, the greatest thing is that puts Ukraine in a position to finally have elections. Zelensky will not last 20 minutes if elections are going to be allowed in Ukraine. Don't forget, he's abolished elections. You've spoken about this, you've highlighted this, and if he does really have elections, the Ukrainian people aren't going to re-elect him, and there is going to be a internal power struggle without the backing of the White House, without the backing of the Pentagon, without the backing of the CIA. Zelensky's regime is finished. Zelensky's regime is something like what Hitler's Third Reich was in April 1945. We're in the last dying days where they're recruiting Hitler-Jugend off the streets and they're recruiting Volkssturm, giving pensioners and young men rifles and Panzerfaust to take on the advancing Red Army. That's basically what the situation is. All along the battlefield, the Russians are steamrolling ahead, taking territory at an extremely fast pace, and the Ukrainian soldiers themselves are demoralized. They know there is no light at the end of the tunnel anymore. Meanwhile, on the Russian side, it's business as usual, and the longevity of Vladimir Putin's calm and collected politics has now prevailed. We see the fruits of Russia's struggle. Russia has played the long game, and Putin has, all this time, he's relied on Trump coming back. All Russians have. I have. We've all secretly been saying, well, Trump will come back in, he'll return, and there'll be peace and order. Trump is a businessman. Trump launches a meme coin of Trump a few days before he enters the White House. It sounds absurd, but he's more interested in making money. 500 billion here, 600 billion there, $1 trillion here. War in Ukraine is not good for the American taxpayer. It's not good for international trade. Trump has not said one word in the first 4 to 5 days of his new presidency. He hasn't threatened at all with any type of military action, any type of weapons, any type of anything like that against Russia. All he said is, we will raise tariffs and we will force Putin to the table. In the Kremlin, the Russians are watching this and saying, there's our man, there's our guy, thank you very much, raise tariffs. Whatever you have to tell the Western media, what do you have to tell the public, we're happy to cop on the chin. But one of the greatest things, George, that I really enjoyed Trump doing in his first days of his presidency was his order on January the 20th that he signed to stop government censorship. To stop government censorship, and many of us all around the world who have been targeted by this censorship, including myself, banned from YouTube, banned from Twitter. And again, I would like to get a live update from you, because I know previously you've announced publicly that in your court proceedings against Twitter, against Elon Musk, one of your demands would be the restoration of Aussie Cossacks account, which I'm very grateful for. Take my hat off to you. But do you think there's a chance we get back into business? I
kind of do. I mean, what Trump said should not be underestimated, that the U.S. government will never again be involved in censoring the opinions of the citizenry. And I like to think that the big tech bros are listening to that. After all, there was Jeff Bezos, Zuckerberg, two of Trump's most bitter and vicious enemies and opponents over the last 9-10 years in American politics. There they were, handing him money to pay for his inauguration, sitting there like pet dogs behind him in the VIP seats. These people are all now seeking to reinvent themselves. And I believe that at least on some issues, including your issue, there will be greater freedom of expression, greater freedom of speech. On other issues which concern me vitally, like the Middle East, for example, I don't expect much of a change in that regard. But on the Russian front, on the Eastern front, well, we've been proven right. We've been vindicated, and we are about to be triumphant. And it's all about now this 60, 90 days. And if I can take you to that point, I'd like some kind of knowledge of your opinion on what the Russian war aims will now be. If I summarize what I think they are, it is a friendly government in Kiev, not a neutral one, a friendly government in Kiev. It is a landlocked Ukraine with the liberation of Odessa and linking up with the liberation of the people of Transnistria. Not only no joining of NATO, but no NATO in Ukraine. Not Ukraine in NATO, no NATO in Ukraine. In other words, absolute neutrality, with no connection at all between the Ukrainian state as it will in the end exist and hostile alliances that are arraigned against Russia. And I think that can be achieved in the next 90 days. I'd be interested in your view if they differ, your views if they differ on what the final outcome might be.
Georgia, I think that you're correct, that it's logical that Russia advances its state border to the frontier of Transnistria. And this is highlighted by the fact that Transnistria has now lost gas supplies because of Ukraine, because of Zelensky. And Russia needs to maintain those people there. Those people have been living in Transnistria, the thin strip of land between Ukraine and Moldova, since the breakup of the Soviet Union. They've been living loyal to the days of the Soviet Union, loyal to the old school days, the Soviet symbology, the Soviet way of life, and they deserve to be rewarded. And they've been waiting, and I can't wait to see the Russian military roll across the border checkpoints between Transnistria and Ukraine, and the joy on the people's faces, especially the elderly, the pensioners, the old Soviet people who have lived through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and have been waiting patiently for this moment. So, of course, it would be a great thing to see Transnistria, the last fort post, the last preservation. It's like a museum piece. It's a beautiful place, and these people deserve to be reunited with their homeland. They never elected to leave the Soviet Union or Russia. So if you look at the map of Ukraine at the moment, Russia has stated that all it is taking, a very conservative claim, is Kherson region, Zaporozhye region, Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, and Crimea, of course. That's very conservative. And the Ukrainians under Zelensky could have accepted that when Russia said, this is all we want. We just want the land corridor to Crimea. We're not after Kiev. We're not after everything else. But now the situation has changed, and so much blood has been spilt that Russia is entitled to go all the way if it needs to, if it has to. Many people in Ukraine, in Odessa, people are waiting. Russian-speaking people in Nikolaev, Odessa, Kharkov, all these cities all around Ukraine, people are waiting for the Russian military. And they are sick to death of Zelensky and his regime, abducting people, body snatchers on the streets, arresting people, targeting the Orthodox Christians, targeting Russians, shutting down churches, and people are waiting for the liberators, the liberation of their lands. Ukraine, if it's going to exist after 90 days, perhaps it'll be a small little country. Let's just fast forward to your question, which was, how would I see it? Well, how would I like to see it? I would love to see the Russian military on the borders with Poland, right? And let's just face it. All of Ukraine is under Russia, because if Ukraine's under Russia, Ukraine is friendly, Ukraine prospers, Ukraine is with Russia, and that's it. And Ukraine is a powerful country. Look how much Ukraine has been fighting in the last 3 years, being forced to fight. Now, these two countries were together. Russia and Ukraine were always together. What a formidable, powerful force. Now, the nightmare of the EU, the nightmare of NATO, is when the Ukrainian soldiers and the Russian soldiers turn their arms around, turn their guns around, turn their tanks around, and march together, shoulder to shoulder against NATO. And that's when you'll see the Poles and the Lithuanians, Estonians, Latvians, and all the other chihuahuas who have been barking from the sidelines, supplying weapons and funding the war, and seeing brothers kill each other and applauding this. You'll see them then shaking in their boots. And so they deserve to shake in their boots. The Russians have been very honorable. Again, the Russians have been spilling their own blood in order for civilians to live, in order to avoid World War III, to avoid using nuclear missiles, to avoid using tactical nukes or artillery nukes. They easily could have done that many times. They've got a huge arsenal. But no, the Russians have been fighting, and this year is the 80th anniversary of 1945 victory in the Great Patriotic War against Nazi Germany. It's a very good year for Russia to obtain victory in the special operation, and we will all celebrate together. We'll take a moment to remember the fallen heroes, and they have once again, the Russian soldiers in the last 3 years, as their forefathers and their great-grandfathers did in the Great Patriotic War in World War II, they have defeated Nazism. Once again, they have done it. And this time, this time there needs to be a long, just, lasting peace, as Putin has said. There's no temporariness anymore. Russia's not going to trust any more Minsk agreements, any more Merkel promises, any more let's do a little ceasefire, freeze the conflict. It's either Russia goes all the way or there is a complete dismemberment, disarmament of Ukraine. And if Poland wants to be smart, accept Putin's offer, accept Medvedev's map. Dmitry Medvedev, the secretary of the Russian Security Council, offered Poland, take back your lands in Western Ukraine. Romania, take back your lands that Stalin gave you. Ukraine didn't get those lands in Bessarabia, in Bukovina. The Poles used to own their lands near Lvov, and the Hungarians, the Slovakians, all of those Western Ukrainian lands. Everyone can take their piece back because Ukraine owes Europe. They owe Europe hundreds of billions of dollars now in weapons and in funding. Well, how are they going to reclaim their money? Take back Western Ukraine. How does the US reclaim their money that they've pumped into Ukraine? Take Greenland. Putin gives it to you. Everyone's happy. Everyone shake hands, and we can get on with looking after our populations, looking after the health of our people, having babies, raising families, advancing. Humanity can advance. Humanity's been going backwards for the last 3 years, and it's all because of one person, because of Zelensky. Zelensky he's like an antichrist. He's a devil who has taken over and is infested into a holy place. Kyiv is a holy place. The city is a holy place for Russians, full of churches and monasteries. And somehow he's managed to weasel his way in there, fool everybody, fool the Ukrainian people. First and foremost, Zelensky has conducted a genocide of his own people. For his own ego's sake, he has slaughtered his own people. The men of Ukraine, the women of Ukraine exported as prostitutes, the children of Ukraine trafficked to Europe and to the West, the rest of the Ukrainians sold for organs, for hearts, kidneys, livers. From a population of 52 million, we're down to 15 to 20 million. We've mentioned this before. The madness has to stop, and the only country that'll ever help Ukraine and really cares for Ukraine is Russia.
Well, Simeon, Boikov, I'll be in Moscow for the anniversary in May. I very earnestly hope that we can meet there. And I repeat my earlier assurance that there will be no settlement with Twitter, in my case, against them, until and unless the ban on the Aussie Cossack is lifted. I take my hat off to you. Thanks for another brilliant, spirited performance. This has been No to NATO, No to War. If you've enjoyed it, well, you better be here next week at the same time, same place, where Richard Medhurst will be in my place. Oh no, I'm also there. Okay, see you next week, same time, same place. Good night.